Let's have a look at this interesting topic. Now, we've had a wonderful time looking at how God is the God of the real world and how biblical worldview helps us to understand the world much better, whether it be in rocks, fossils, whether it be in understanding the Bible, and also in biology. And if you remember in Genesis 1, God finished his creation and he said everything was very good. Now, we don't live in a very good world these days. In fact, when John Mackay and I say things like that, they look at us and say, well, you live in Australia, it's full of horrible things, like spiders and snakes and sharks. And, how can you say that there ever was a very good world full of very good things? Well, let's have a closer look at some of those things. Now, we do not have a monopoly on snakes, spiders and sharks in Australia, so I will use some examples that are not from Australia, but I'll give you a few examples that are. But let's look a bit at the background of why this is important, because a lot of people want to restrict us to just theological theory, as we heard from Simon's talks about the skeptics from outside and from within the church. They're quite happy for us to just stick to some theological theory. They really get annoyed if we start to encroach on the real world and the world of science. And a few years ago, I came across this scientific question, right? And it was in a letter to the journal Nature, which is a highly prestigious journal in the UK. And this writer wrote in after someone had written an article to suggest that if we really want to understand human behaviour, we might have to consult some theologians and some church people, not just biologists. And this person wrote in and said, I was horrified to read in a recent editorial Where Theology Matters, that was the name of the editorial, in the world's foremost science journal. Not only did the editorial appear to support the position that science and religion deal with different aspects of reality, which they do not. Now, notice this is a skeptic writing in, and he knows that you cannot separate the theology from the biology and the geology and all of those things, right? Science. So not only did the editorial appear to support the position that science and religion deal with different aspects of reality, which they do not. For example, either Jesus rose from the dead or he didn't. Clearly a scientific question. Now, in fact, well, is it a scientific question? Is it a historical question? Or is it both? But the point is he was making, if we are going to take theologians, if we're going to take the Bible seriously, it has to be about the real world. We cannot keep theology and science in separate little compartments, never the twain shall meet. So the real issue in the creation versus evolution debate is not science versus religion. It's really about what's true and what's error. What is the real history of the real world? Now, David Attenborough will tell you the real history of the real world is about evolution. And this was a statement he made a few years ago in a long letter with a whole lot of quite famous colleagues, Richard Dawkins, Alice Roberts, Michael Rees, and they were saying nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. It is a fundamental concept that describes and explains the development of the diversity of life on this planet. And the reason they were writing to the Welsh Government back in 2019 was that they wanted the Welsh Government to change the law in education there so that pupils are introduced to evolution at primary school level, and there is an explicit ban on teaching creation and intelligent design. Because as far as they were concerned, the real history of the real world is that chemicals turned into human beings over millions of years, involving a whole lot of processes that somehow mysteriously increased complexity, even though we never see that in the real world. We see the opposite.